to today's last, actually, in the visiting speakers series from the University of Southampton Centre for International Film Research. Now, I am recording the talk. That means that this introduction and then Shohini's talk will be recorded and will be a resource later for people to look at. I'm not going to record the Q&A, so anyone who wants to participate in that and make any points and so on, and we invite as many people, or we invite everyone to participate in the question and answer session, but that won't actually be part of the recording, so we'll stop that once the main talk has finished. Obvious pieces of housekeeping as usual. Please keep your microphones off unless you are actually addressing Shohini or me. There's the chat function, so anyone who wants to make a comment or just log that you'd like to talk, feel free to use that. You can also use the reaction button to put your hand up and indicate that you'd like to speak. If you would like me to read out a question or a comment or a point, then again, do please use the chat function for that. These are all kind of among the icons that you can see at the top of the screen. Yes, so as I say, usual housekeeping points there. Now, I'm very, very pleased to welcome Professor Shohini Chaudhuri. She's a professor in the Department of Literature, Film and Theatre Studies at the University of Essex here in the UK. Her current work builds on her research and curatorial interests in Middle Eastern cinema over the last 20 years, as well as her scholarship on world cinema and film and human rights. And it's her current work that she'll be speaking to us about in a moment. But I wanted to welcome Shohini to speak to us for a long time now. It's actually been several years I've been trying to dragoon her into doing one of these visiting speakers talks for us, and she's finally relented now. And we're very pleased to be able to close the season with her talk, which I'm very much looking forward to. I actually first came across Shohini's work when I think it was when I was just starting out actually as a lecturer. And I came across the wonderful early essay of hers that she co-authored on the open image, poetic realism, and the new Iranian cinema. Something that, for me, and I'm sure for many, many other people who've read that excellent piece of scholarship, opens up the world of Iranian cinema, relating what, to me at least, was quite an unfamiliar series of films to wider debates and traditions from Bazinian realism, phenomenology, and was something true to its topic that really formed an epiphanic moment for me in film theory. And then, as well as that, I was actually able to use her book on contemporary world cinema, Europe, the Middle East, East Asia, and South Asia, as an essential teaching tool and a bit of a crib sheet as well. I was teaching in topics that I had never actually studied before, I have to say. And Shohini's work was really, really crucial, both for me as a lecturer and for the students who I was lecturing to. Since then, she's also written the books Feminist Film Theorists, Laura Mulvey, Kaya Silverman, Teresa De Laurentiis, and Barbara Creed in 2006. Then in 2014, Cinema of the Dark Side, Atrocity, and the Ethics of Film Spectatorship. And now we're particularly lucky today because she's actually going to be talking to us about her almost literally hot off the press book, Crisis Cinema in the Middle East, Creativity and Constraint in Iran and the Arab World. So I'm very much looking forward to this, a sneak preview of really cutting edge research as she talks to us today on the topic of creativity under constraint, 3 tactical insights from the Middle Eastern road movie. So Shohini, over to you. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you so much, Lewis. That was a really lovely, warm introduction. Thank you so much for inviting me, and it's lovely to meet everyone and also to see some familiar names in the audience. So as Lewis mentioned, I'm going to be speaking on, well, a topic related to my book. This paper is actually based on a chapter in this book. It's actually officially published in July, but I just got the advanced copies last week. So it's called Crisis Cinema in the Middle East, Creativity and Constraint in Iran and the Arab World. The purpose of the book is to help readers understand the constraints of production and distribution in the region by learning from filmmakers' first-hand experiences. And it builds a theoretical framework around these constraints and the creative strategies that filmmakers are using in response to these constraints. It's a comparative book, so it's not a nation-by-nation survey, and I hope that it has transferable insights to other contexts. The book adopts Meta Hiert's notion of practitioners' agency to emphasize how filmmakers' choices are shaped by constraints, but also how their choices transform those constraints into creative opportunities. In the book, I cover several categories of filmmaker, each constrained in different ways that affect their creative approaches, including filmmakers based in the region, exiles who have left, emigres who travel to the region to make their films there, and filmmakers from the West who make films in the Middle East or who collaborate with Middle Eastern filmmakers. In the book, each chapter focuses on a particular creative strategy. This chapter is on the road movie. Now, the road movie is usually identified with Hollywood films, which recount journeys of rebellion and self-discovery, often with the thrilling forward impulse of action entertainment. And you might think of Easy Rider or Thelma and Louise or numerous contemporary examples. The open road, tapering to a vanishing point on the horizon, is a common trope in the road movie, and it bears the promise of freedom and mobility. When reworked in other contexts, the road movie often dramatizes contrasts between the genre's mythologies and the starker realities of the territories in which the films are set. Kay Dickinson has observed how the fantasy of the open road is subverted in Palestinian roadblock movies of the Second Intifada era, which confront curfews, checkpoints, and segregated roads. Laura Marks finds that the resulting obstructed movement is not confined to road movies from Palestine, but belongs to a wider Arab genre that occurs in other places where roads are blocked off for specifically political reasons. However, the delayed or interrupted journey is not unique to the Arab world. As this paper shows, it's part of the genre's broader connection to crisis, and it's not the only feature of road movies from the Middle East. While filmmakers have adapted road movie motifs to expose restrictions on freedom and movement, the genre has also presented them with creative ways of overcoming these obstacles. The road movie, as we shall see, is not just about vehicular traffic. It is also about the tactics that enable films to be produced and to circulate both within and outside geopolitical borders. With my case study films, I sketch out 3 tactical insights drawn from the genre. Firstly, blocked passage stimulates creativity, as illustrated in Amber Farris's documentary Speed Sisters. Secondly, the vehicle is a simultaneously private and public space, lending itself to creative uses pioneered by the Iranian director Abbas Kiarostami and further innovatively utilized in Jafar Panahi's Taxi Tehran. Finally, the road movie's foreground and background dynamics of characters and landscapes marry popular appeal with political consciousness, as exemplified by Roy Dibb's experimental fiction film, actually, but it's a kind of documentary called Mondial 2010. The chapter in the book actually has several more case study films, but I'm focusing on these 3 films in this paper for simplicity. Now I'm going to attempt to share my PowerPoint. This is my first time presenting on Microsoft Teams, so please bear with me. So can you see this?
Yep. Looks good.
Hopefully. Okay. Now, the road movie often arises from and explores crisis. Prototypical road films, such as The Grapes of Wrath, established important motifs of the genre during the Great Depression, when the Dust Bowl crisis forced Americans to migrate westwards in pursuit of work. The film theorist and philosopher Gilles Deleuze identifies the voyage form as characteristic of the time image that he claims arose in Italian neorealism, where protagonists take unpredictable journeys through real post-war landscapes. Road movies permit real or staged background events to enter into and sometimes disrupt the story. In Voyage to Italy, for example, a religious procession literally arrests a couple's road trip through Naples. Through windscreen shots, now a genre staple, the car in this film acts like a camera capturing the surrounding landscape and people, paradoxically by means of an enclosed private capsule. As Nadia Yacoub notes, the road plays a central role in Palestinian literature and cinema, dating back to the 1948 Nakba that saw over 700,000 Palestinians expelled from their homeland and generated a refugee crisis, leaving millions of Palestinians on the road. In The Duped, an early Middle Eastern road movie from 1972, 3 undocumented Palestinian refugees take a fateful journey across the Iraqi desert in search of work, dependent on a Palestinian driver who has legal status to smuggle them inside a water tank across the border to Kuwait. The film exemplifies what Rebecca Stein calls discrepant mobility, a term that she uses for the effects of the 1948 expulsions and limits upon free movement in occupied Palestine, but that has relevance to the broader Middle East and beyond. In this paper, discrepant mobility is registered not only in the stories that road movies from the region tell, but also the circumstances under which they were made. Since it often involves being on the road, filmmaking rests precariously on the ever-shifting ground of travel permits and other obstacles to free movement. The Palestinian filmmaker Anne-Marie Jassir, discussing her experiences of working in her homeland, remarks that added to the usual constraints of independent filmmaking, there are the Kafkaesque restrictions of military occupation, which are not just the obvious ones of checkpoints and permits, but come up in the most mundane and basic ways, like picking up a crew member from the airport, speaking Arabic on set and having the police called on you, and renting equipment. Palestinians with West Bank identity cards are barred from Israel unless they obtain special permits, reinforcing just how different Palestinian experience is from that of Israeli and foreign passport holders who can move between Israel and the West Bank seamlessly. Conflicts generally impair freedom of movement for filmmaking. Closures of international airports and other restrictions on mobility during wartime jeopardized the completion of several books, also considered in my book, that are from other contexts such as Libya and Yemen. And those restrictions also altered those films' creative approaches. Free movement is also equally crucial for film distribution. When Jassir curated a Palestinian film festival in New York in 2003, it was a major feat to obtain the videotapes for the screenings due to checkpoints around Palestinian towns and curfews in the West Bank and Gaza. Since then, technological advances such as digital formats and fast broadband, where this is available, have made it easier to submit films to festivals. Or, failing that, as the Iranian director Jafar Panahi says, all you need to do is find a traveler, someone who is going abroad, and give them your movie in a USB flash drive. Even before the digital age, Iranian filmmakers relied on travelers to smuggle films in suitcases to international festivals. Panahi recalls storing his films in packages bearing labels of films by other directors in order to deter suspicion. Transporting films in suitcases remains a fallback during periods of prolonged internet blackout in Iran, as happened in the run-up to the 2019 Sydney Persian Film Festival. People, like films, have traditionally relied on roads and other routes to travel to festivals and screenings. Jasia flew from Palestine for the London premiere of Wajib, her film, which is, the title is Arabic for duty, and she tweeted that it was her wajib to attend. She regards such attendance as part of her role as a director. She says, "We make films to share with people, and this is a way to share them, to connect to your audience, to meet them and speak with them." Nonetheless, many Middle Eastern filmmakers, along with their cast and crew, are prevented from attending international screenings by visa denials. The difficulty of obtaining visas reinforces a system of differential access to mobility, depending on what passport you have. Further restrictions hinder filmmakers from traveling within the region. As artist filmmaker Larissa Sansur explains, against the backdrop of hostilities between Lebanon and Israel, it's very hard for Palestinians to go to Lebanon, which is just next door. I entered there on my Russian passport because my mother is Russian, she said. Palestinians traveling to Lebanon on a Palestinian passport are rarely granted visas. Similarly, the Lebanese cannot enter Israel to go to Palestine. In the most extreme cases, travel bans are imposed on filmmakers. The Iranian state in 2010 sentenced the director Jafar Panahi to a 20-year ban from filmmaking and traveling abroad. This excludes him from attending international festivals, although he can travel freely throughout Iran. For Panahi and other filmmakers whose work is featured in this chapter, the road movie has served as a creative solution to these restrictions through tactical insights, such as the following. Tactical insight number 1, blocked passage is a stimulus to creativity. Obstacles can force people to be creative in order to find a way around them. For many, this is a form of survival amidst absurd and harsh constraints. This is true of both the filmmakers and their characters in these road movies, who are shown as creative agents, not victims in states of dependency, even as the films highlight injustices of restricted movement. For example, in Amber Farris's film documentary, Speed Sisters, Mara, Noor, Moore, Mona and Betty, along with their captain Maysoon, are the Speed Sisters, an all-female Palestinian motor racing team. And I would like to show you the opening clip from this film. I'm just going to check that I've chosen computer sound.
It's not working. Oh, that's great. That's a really good start. هدفك إن أخلي كل العالم تعرف إنه في وحدة اسمها مرح الحركة بتمثل فلسطين. When I enter this beautiful modified car, 600 horsepower, I feel like the happiest girl in the world. أنا بنزل على سباق السيارات، ما بنزل عشان كأس ولا عشان مرتبة، بس هي بتكون طاقة جوا الواحد لازم يفرغها. سباق السيارات قدامي لأنه أنا ربيت من عائلة بسابقة. It's like we put the pepper for the food. Like the race without the girls, it's not fun.
Okay. The Speed Sisters compete against men and against each other for the title of fastest woman. Canadian-Lebanese director Amber Faris was living in Palestine at the time and was first hired to film promotional videos for them, then realized the potential for a feature documentary when she saw a classic racing dynamic in Mara and Betty's rivalry. Betty, as you heard, hails from a wealthy family of racers. And in the film, we see her posing next to a car and declaring, "Betty Sada, I'm a brand." In contrast, Mara lives in a refugee camp in Jenin. Her mother is a driving instructor and her father, Khalid, is a dental technician whose family was expelled from Haifa in 1948. Speed Sisters follows the team through 2 racing seasons. Its first is dedicated to the first season, which Betty wins, while the other half ends with Mara's victory in the second season, despite the Palestinian Racing Federation's inconsistent and arbitrary rules favouring Betty over her. Speed Sisters makes knowing reference to the racing movie, a subgenre of the road movie characterized by racing car choreography as well as racing rivalries, such as that between Brazilian Formula One champion Ayrton Senna and his fellow driver Alan Frost in the documentary Senna. The film's sound design, as you heard, consists of motors and skidding tires, as well as a medley of Arab heavy metal, rap, and pop songs. With their mobile protagonists, race and road movies contain thrilling possibilities, not least of which is the thrill of high speed that the Speed Sisters revel in. These women are determined to embrace the highways despite obstacles in their path. When Noor appears on an Al Jazeera TV show, the irony of speed rallies taking place in Palestine is not lost on the presenters, because every few minutes in Palestine, you encounter a checkpoint. Exactly, she replies. We don't have open spaces where we can put cones and train freely. Road and race movie fantasies of automotive speed and empowerment are juxtaposed with the shrinking of Palestinian space, a reality that the team confront regularly when they are training. Near Ofer Israeli Detention Centre, they found a small empty lot where they train in the vicinity of a watchtower, soldiers and barbed wire. One day, on their way to the training ground, soldiers signal for them to stop their car. Here's another clip. Okay, seem to have lost sound.
The sound was okay, actually. I could hear that a second ago.
Okay, you could hear it.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Lewis. I'll try again then.
مرجان كيف نتدرب، وهذا بالنسبة لنا يعني شيء حلو قلت يعطي صورة عن الفريق تبعنا. جيش بلايو بالساحة جيب في قنابل الغاز. Go back بدي go back what's up شو صار؟ حاجات؟
بنشر
Hold on.
I got it.
No, hold on, I got it. أجيب شنو قوم أجيب. Oh my god. أنا كاميرا.
قلت لك تروحيش، قلت لك مش مسحه معهم، هدول ولاد حرام ولاد كلب.
وانا بفكر اني اروح.
ايش بقول لك انت كمان؟ اعطيني اصوت عليك. ظهرك يا حبيبتي، نص ظهرك.
Okay, so as you saw, Betty steps out and approaches the soldiers. As a daring driver, she's accustomed to taking risks and assumes that a pretty blonde girl like her will not be harmed. Suddenly, she's shot in the back, though luckily not severely hurt. The film captures the moment. In my interview with her, Amber Faris recalled, "We were just about to leave, and then I yelled at Lucy, the cinematographer, to turn on the camera, which she did. Then Betty was hit within seconds." The scene's gravity is leavened with humour when Betty later recovers and Maysoon and Noor make light-hearted fun of her. Noor points out that if you're Palestinian, Israeli soldiers are indiscriminate. They don't care if you're blonde, dark, ugly, or pretty. Despite the injustices of living under occupation, neither the film nor the characters dramatically dwell on such moments. They move on with characteristic resilience. I'm just going to find an image. Okay, here it is. Early on, Mara repurposes her family's black Volkswagen, making it lighter and faster by removing its glass, wipers, and outer steel, an act that reflects her economic precarity. The family previously lived under 24-hour military curfew when they were only allowed to leave their home for 2 hours a day to buy food and water. Her father, Khalid, knows that curfews can be imposed at any time, so he toils long hours in his workshop while he can, manufacturing dental prosthetics to support Mara financially and buy her a new car. With their Jerusalem IDs, Maysoon and Noor can travel to the sea at Jaffa whenever they want, unlike Mara, Betty, and Mona, whose West Bank IDs require them to obtain permits. For most West Bank Palestinians, visiting the sea is a form of freedom of movement beyond their ken, as shown when Mara gets a permit with the crew's help, Faraz explained to me. But first, she has to walk through the turnstiles at Kalandia checkpoint, while Noor simply drives through with her Israeli number plate. Arriving at the sea, Mara dives in, fully clothed. She says, "They took the most beautiful place we had. Imagine if we could come here every day." A politically charged statement that articulates a national longing for freedom of movement, open spaces, and connection with the land and sea. It gathers emotional force from earlier scenes that established her limitations, which had temporarily transcended on the road trip. Cinematically, Faris wanted to counterbalance the liberation of racing with the obstacles of living under occupation. She said to me, the car is an appendage for race car drivers. It's their own private space which gives them freedom, even with roadblocks. They have some degree of control where to go. This freedom is contrasted with what can be seen outside the cars as they drive through checkpoints surrounded by Israel's road signage and separation wall. The races happen in repurposed venues in different cities, taking us on a journey through Palestine, starting with a wholesale vegetable market in Jenin, then Bethlehem's presidential airstrip, and then the Jericho Security Forces Academy. The racecourse itself is filled with obstacles. Faris told me that she approached it as a microcosm of the occupation, with its roadblocks, rules changing at a whim, and an autocratic disdain for questioning. It's very similar to what the occupation is to the Palestinians. In the film, each race is introduced with a map of Palestine indicating the location of the city and a diagram of the track with its obstacles. GoPros or action cameras mounted on windscreens inside the cars enable us to experience the track from the characters' perspectives as they wend in and out of the roadblocks. Inevitably, the filming of Speed Sisters was affected by the very same mobility restrictions. The Israeli army stopped the film crew on several occasions, and once they were pulled over by the Palestinian police. Faris was also told to stop filming at military checkpoints, which she emphasizes is a red line, as you can see in this quote. Despite this, Faris told me that she believes that it's easier to film in the West Bank than it is in a lot of places that she's filmed, including the US. Gaza's a little trickier, she added. For her, this is because in Palestine, people are much more used to having cameras around, whether it's NGO films or the news. She said that it was for a long time, it was such a hotbed of the news cycle that people are more open to it. This cemented her view that each place has its own constraints that you have to deal with when making a movie, and Palestine has its set that aren't any better or worse than anywhere else. Nevertheless, as Faris acknowledges, her Canadian passport lends her greater freedom of movement than the majority of Palestinians. She admitted, I don't have the same constraints, and in terms of the mechanics of the occupation, none of that applies to me. Furthermore, being a foreigner, unable to speak the languages well enough to understand the underlying tensions, she admits that she may have been unaware of some of the constraints upon her. At the same time, although she is not Palestinian, as an Arab Muslim woman living in Palestine, Faris enjoyed an insider-outsider status that gave her unprecedented access to the community, helping her to build relationships with the women and their families. She believes that her gender was another factor that allowed her to move in those spaces, pointing out that unlike men who often receive rough treatment from Israeli soldiers, as a woman, there's an underestimation of what you're doing, which means, she said, you can get away with more. However, as Betty's experience shows, gender exceptionalism does not always work. The Speed Sisters appealed to Faris precisely because of her insider-outsider identity. She told me, I'm not even sure if a Palestinian would look at those women and see an opportunity of making a film about them because they may see them as too fringe or not really telling the Palestinian story. Ultimately, my goal was to show women in a context where people from my hometown in Canada could identify with them. Breaking international audiences' stereotypes of Arab women was uppermost in her mind. This influenced how Faris handled pressure to show pushback from the community when the film was in development. She told me, anytime we pitched in the West, people were like, where's the tension? Obviously, these women can't just be racing like this. There must be some guy or some father who didn't like them racing. In contrast to Western assumptions of oppressed Arab Muslim women, Speed Sisters shows men being overwhelmingly supported by the men in the community. Those men are like supportive of their ambitions, and we see the story of Mara and her family and her father, but we also see conversations with male racers. Instead of trying to manufacture or amplify the disapproval, which did exist, Faris decided to convey it more subtly in the manner that the women experienced it. In one scene, Maysoon reads out comments from the internet after Noor's Al Jazeera interview, among them complaints that sports and fashion are not the way to liberate Palestine, and that the women should focus on reading the Quran instead. Faris explains, "You want to show a place in a critical light, but I also don't want to take liberties of criticizing it with a viewpoint that's just North American." She believes that this approach, together with the fact that Speed Sisters was made and edited in Palestine with a Palestinian editor and co-producer, benefited its reception there as well as abroad. In Palestine, audiences could see it as a reflection of their lives, including the support networks that exist. Internationally, the genre enabled the film to appeal on different levels and attract audiences beyond the usual activist crowd. Tactical insight number 2. The vehicle is simultaneously a public and private space. Inside the car is another world, runs Speed Sisters' tagline. The vehicle belongs outdoors, yet it is an enclosed and sealed off space, sealed off from the street, making it a space that is both public and private. The film historian A.L. Rees writes, "The car is a social machine. Only racing cars are for soloists. The rest carry passengers." Although we might note that in Speed Sisters, racing is also a team sport, the road and the vehicle are certainly sociable settings in many road movies, affording opportunities for conversation and chance encounters. In classical Hollywood, it gave rise to the genre motif of the people, as in It Happened One Night, a classical Hollywood film from 1934, where the protagonist finds herself in an enforced intimacy with fellow travelers from different social classes. During the production code era, Hollywood filmmakers were alive to the car's creative possibilities. Not only did the setup of 2 people on the front seat make for easy classical framing and keep the dialogue going, as Steve Cohen and Ina Ray Hark write, it allowed sexual tensions to be intimated at a time when sex was not permitted on screen. The car as a vehicle for freedom of expression has been utilized in different creative ways in films made in the Middle East. The Iranian director Kiarostami is an influential practitioner of this strategy. He has frequently organized his films around the car and road trips. For him, the car's appeal is twofold. Firstly, as he suggests in his documentary 10 on 10, the act of sitting side by side rather than face to face encourages people to talk more freely, since they can make eye contact only when they want to. Secondly, the car's mobility compensates for the relatively static camera and supplies a varying backdrop. In the feature film 10, Kiarostami uses the car to bypass Iranian film censorship codes that stipulate wearing of hijab at all times, even at home when women would not normally veil themselves, which prevents a realistic portrayal of intimate conversations in domestic interiors. 10 is shot almost entirely inside a car, filmed with 2 digital cameras affixed to the dashboard. Its narrative consists of 10 dialogues between a female driver, Manya, and her passengers, who, apart from her son, are all female, non-professional actors playing versions of themselves. According to Manya Akbari, who stars in the film along with her own car and family members, the actors were not aware that they were being filmed, which raises profound ethical questions that I deal with in another chapter in the book. And as I found through my conversations with Manya Akbari, she has very different views about what happened during the filming of 10 than Kiarostami had, or that had projected to the world. Anyway, in his interview with Jeff Andrew, Kiarostami claimed that he sometimes directed from the back seat or followed in another car, monitoring the performances on screen. With these self-imposed constraints, including the single set, the car, limited camera angles, and a remote director, and the absence of a film crew, he showed the creative possibilities for making films in this way that have been taken up by many other filmmakers, including Akbari herself. The car's public and private space provides the stage for intimate conversations that touch upon sensitive topics such as women's rights in Iran. In Jafar Panahi's Taxi Tehran, his third feature film since his 2010 sentence, a succession of passengers take a ride in a taxi, among them a DVD smuggler named Omid, a woman with her injured husband, Panahi's argumentative niece, Hannah, two women carrying their goldfish to a shrine, and the defense lawyer, Nasreen Sotoudeh. The taxi driver is none other than Panahi himself, thinly disguised in a grey beret. Like 10, Taxi takes place inside a car, largely filmed by a dashboard-mounted camera. Its use of the car as a private public space is shaped by its clandestine conditions of production and mobility restrictions imposed on the director. All Panahi's post-filmmaking ban films have necessitated sealed locations. This is because, as he says himself, anyone who wants to use public locations in Iran for making a movie has to have permission from the government. Otherwise, he or she will be arrested by the police and their equipment confiscated. Panahi's first two films after the ban, This Is Not a Film and Closed Curtain, were made in indoor private spaces, his Tehran apartment and his beach house near the Caspian Sea, respectively. This production constraint gives Closed Curtain its title, as well as its story about a filmmaker trying to hide his dog following an Iranian law banning such pets in the home, by keeping the curtains closed. Fundamentally, the black drapes across the window are there to conceal the shoot so that nobody from the outside could see the crew and the characters. Marsa Salamati argues that all of Panahi's post-ban films involve the creation of other spaces, or what she calls, using Foucault's term, heterotopias. She writes, once we enter those spaces, we are bound to stay as the camera never leaves. On a more literal level, however, the camera never leaves these confined spaces for safety reasons. In order not to attract attention and to minimize risks to his collaborators, Panahi employs a limited cast and crew in his post-ban films. Despite these precautions, the co-director of This Is Not a Film had his passport confiscated, and later the same happened to the co-director and actress of Closed Curtain when they were due to leave the country to attend the Berlin Film Festival premiere. Repercussions that curtailed their own freedom of movement. Panahi says, that's why I really have to reconsider what I'm doing and come up with a small-scale project that I can shoot and sound record myself without involving other people. By necessity, my movies are becoming more and more minimalistic. It's also in this light that we can understand Panahi's own appearances in these films. He says, if there's a part I can play, I just do it myself. Not only or primarily instances of authorial self-reflexivity, which is how they are usually interpreted, these cameo or star appearances by him are a product of constraints under which he is working. While these restrictions would be limiting to most filmmakers, they are particularly so for Panahi, who regards himself as a socially committed director, reflecting his surroundings in his movies. Before the ban, he had filmed in bustling, urban exterior spaces. At the time of Closed Curtain, he commented, When you go inside, you feel so limited. In our case, we couldn't even look out the window because of security. By contrast, his next two films, Taxi Tehran and Three Faces, are both road movies. Taxi Tehran is set in Tehran and Three Faces is in the remote countryside. By means of the car, a sealed private space within the public realm, and small digital cameras, they permit him to shoot outside and reconnect with the social side of his filmmaking. In Taxi Tehran, the road movie motif of the people as passengers share brief encounters within the vehicle is used to capture the city and its inhabitants. So the shared taxi is a social machine, and the conversations of the people inside the vehicle touch on debates on human rights and cinema, as well as offering occasions for much merriment and humour. And here's the trailer to Taxi Tehran. Okay, I think you couldn't hear that, right?
No, the sound was fine. Yeah, it was okay.
Okay, that's odd. Okay. Thank you. I'll try again.
دزدگیره آقا؟
یه جورایی دزدگیرم هست.
ظاهرش معلوم خیلی چیز خفن و کار درستی باشه. فیلمبرداریه دیگه آقا پناهی. شما کجا؟ تاکسی کجا آقا پناهی؟
تو چه سامانه این شدی اومدی دنبالم؟ اونو دنبالتم. من همه بچه‌ها رو اساس دادم دارم کارگردانم تو با این میای دنبالم. از حداقل فکر آور خودسی و فکر آوری من باش.
اگه تندتر بری حتما میرسی. ایشالله میرسی.
تو رو خدا آقا. تو رو خدا. تو باشه داری میره.
دست من نکاوه هم وسیعت کنم. بهش نمیرسه. دستم تا مقدمونه بشید.
زنده موندم. بیشتر ترسیده.
خودم دیدم حالش خیلی بد بود.
هر آدمی که مجرم به دنیا نمیاد آقا از
من نمیفهمم اصلا شما چی دارید. من میگم اگه 2 نفر رو اعدام بکنن گوشی بقیه دستشون میاد.
چون آنچه میدن اشتباه داریم میگیم آقا.
اینجا رو واسه آدم زندون میکنن. نزدیکترین دوستات و بدترین دشمنات میکنن. به نظرم بیخیالش شد. مرسی.
این هم راه رو بلده هم زودتر میره. بفرمایید.
خیلی بود.
Okay. Unlike 10, the dashboard camera points inwards and outwards, turning the windscreen into a mobile viewpoint on the city. It is supplemented by other cameras within the narrative reality to follow the action from different angles. For example, when the injured man and his wife scramble onto the back seat, Panahi lends Omid his mobile phone to record the man's last will. Panahi not only stars, he is a cinematographer too, manually turning the dashboard camera to film events outside the car. While he is certainly in charge of the location, the one who decides what part of the reality outside is to be captured, Taxi Tehran is not just a reflexive self-portrait, but makes creative use of the vehicle as a social ensemble. Nasreen Sotoudeh's cameo is significant. She shared with Panahi the Sakharov Prize for Freedom of Thought in 2012. Known for defending political prisoners, she has also repeatedly been imprisoned for her work, and like Panahi, banned from leaving Iran and practicing her profession. During the conversation, she quips, "Although you are released from prison, the outside world is only a bigger prison, since the authorities are always watching." Before leaving the cab, she adds that Panahi had better remove her words from his film, otherwise he will be accused of sianamai, literally showing the negative aspects, and the authorities will give him more trouble. Sianamai is a term used in the Iranian media to express disapproval of filmmakers. It's translated in the subtitles as sordid realism. As Trevor Johnston remarks in his review of Taxi Tehran, being out and about in the city or country, yet still sheltered enough to be able to speak your mind, is what the setting of the car has afforded all these filmmakers, bringing with it the implication that once you step outside the vehicle, you're in an environment where words and behaviour must be kept within strictly defined and policed parameters. In this respect, the car is a heterotopia, affording an exceptional space for freedom of expression. However, Panahi is more constrained than many other filmmakers using this strategy because he has to direct from inside the car, whereas they can direct from outside or another vehicle. The DVD smuggler, Omid, plays a further key role. Firstly, he is the one who recognizes Panahi and that he's making a movie. Omid makes viewers aware that the film is scripted by recognizing the dialogue between the first two passengers as being from the director's earlier film, Crimson Gold. With carefully orchestrated character appearances and narrative twists, Taxi is not merely an observational document as it appears. Secondly, Omid's profession as a movie smuggler, known in Iran as a filmi, brings screen traffic into the picture. In particular, the social practice of watching banned films brought from street vendors who sell pirated DVDs to car passengers and undertake home deliveries. In a context where the state tightly controls film distribution through regular channels, Omid claims to be providing a cultural service since he offers viewers in Iran rare access to foreign and banned Iranian films. It is on the DVD black market that banned work by Panahi and other filmmakers is found, a shadow economy that puts films into circulation while withholding financial remuneration from filmmakers. In interview, Panahi has joked that not only did I not make any money, but when I want to give copies of my own films to my friends, I have to buy the DVDs. I don't even get a discount. Yet, through these informal networks, local audiences can see his films, a matter of importance to Panahi himself, who has been accused of making films exclusively for international festivals. In the absence of official endorsement, piracy is a pragmatic alternative, turning Panahi and the DVD smuggler into veritable partners, as Omid hints in Taxi Tehran. In other scenes, we follow Hannah. Oh, I'm really sorry about that. Let me just, okay, get to the next slide. In other scenes, we follow Hannah, who is making a film for her homework assignment. Okay.
دزگیره آقا
یه جورایی دزگیرم هست.
ظاهرش معلوم خیلی چیز خفن و کار درستی باشه.
فیلمبرداریه دیگه آقا پناهی. شما کجا؟ تاکسی کجا آقا پناهی؟
تو چه خبره این شدی اومدی دنبالم اونو دنبال من همه بچه‌ها هستم شدن دارم کارگردانم تو با این میاد دنبالم اگه حداقل فکر آور خودسی یا فکر آوری من باشه.
اگه تندتر بری حتما میرسی. ایشالله میرسی.
I'm really sorry, I don't know why my video is playing. Lewis, can you just can you hear the video playing?
Very faintly. No, it seems to have stopped now, actually.
من نمیفهمم اصلا شما چرا من میگم اگه 2 نفر رو اعدام بکنن گوشی بقیه دستشون میاد.
That's why. Okay, sorry. It was because it clicked on YouTube. I'm really sorry about that.
That's okay.
Okay. Okay, I think I'll just leave it on the screen. As I mentioned, I'm not used to Microsoft Teams. So in other scenes, we follow Hannah, who's making a film for her homework assignment, a film that has to conform to certain rules to be distributable. The rules echo the Ministry of Culture and Islamic Guidance's censorship guidance, censorship rules, and one of them is to avoid exhibiting the dark side of reality, Siyah Namai. Hannah's experiences show how making a movie that can be legally shown in Iran can compromise the truth, since everyday reality is complex with both light and dark sides. Taxi underlines the need for alternative outlets, a point that is reinforced when, in the absence of end credits, a title expresses gratitude to all those who helped anonymously with this undistributable film, stamping its modes of production and circulation on the finished film. In the Argentine film, The Motorcycle Diaries, okay, so I'm now moving on to Tactical Insight 3, the road movie's foreground-background dynamics, which marry popular appeal with political consciousness. In the Argentine movie, The Motorcycle Diaries, a dramatization of Ernesto Che Guevara and his friend Alberto Granado's journey across Latin America, the focus diverts from the male buddy's story of adventure and sexual conquest to solidarity with the oppressed people whose struggles they witness on the road. Real people that the cast and crew met on the road are incorporated into the film, implying continuities between past injustices that revolutionized Che Guevara and the present. Several road movies from the Middle East have also exploited relationships between foreground, the traveling characters in their vehicle, and background, the landscape and people that form their journey's backdrop, to generate political consciousness under the guise of an entertaining trip. Other examples include Under the Bombs, and I'm going to show the PowerPoint here. Okay, Under the Bombs. This is by the Lebanese director Philippe Araktingi, which was shot during and in the immediate aftermath of the July 2006 war. The professional lead actors interact with actual civilians, soldiers, and rescue workers on location who react spontaneously with authentic dialogue, expressing their testimonies of the crisis. Through journeys that take characters outside of their comfort zones and into contact with people and places they might never otherwise encounter, this use of the genre highlights the road trip's transformative power and allows a country or region's social hardships to be explored. A latent homoeroticism pervades mainstream road movies, where male buddies share intimacy on the road. In the experimental short film Mondial 2010, there's a shift to an explicitly gay couple, two Lebanese men, Youssef and Ibrahim, who drive from Beirut to Ramallah. Okay. And this is a clip from Mondial 2010.
احنا بنبص على فاهم بكون احسن من كده
شو؟ وتفتختين ليه؟
شو ليه؟ بنتجنب مشاكل بنسأله تعرف كل مرة هي مش
شاكر وجايين نقضي فرصة ما حدا بيعرفنا
بالضبط جايين نقضي فرصة، ليه بدنا نغرق بال 5 مليون؟
شو ما عم بفهم يوسف عن جد. نعطينا الموفين بخصوص مشان نتفادى هيك نوع بارانويا على الفاضي. شو في؟
إيه ابراهيم كأنه أنا ما عبالي إنه نروح بعض يعني.
خلص مش مشكلة. صلا نتحمل إنه كل يوم الصبح نلعب لعبة المثبت تحت الثاني كمان ما بنكشف يعني الله شو حنصلي.
شو بعدك عم بتصور؟
لا ماشي. عم جرب اتسافر. بدك بوسني؟
لا أصلا مش.
And Mondial 2010 shows an impossible journey. Beirut and Ramallah are geographically close, yet it is illegal for Lebanese nationals to visit Palestine since it is occupied by Israel. As the director Roy Dibb remarks, those impossibilities and constraints are a major element of why the movie was made and how it was made. Due to the travel restriction that prevents Lebanese from going to Palestine, he has never visited Palestine himself. He got the rushes for Mondial 2010 from a friend in Ramallah, whom he asked to film his city as if he were visiting, and the story was dictated by this footage. As Dibb elaborates, in filmmaking, the director usually has control, thinking of the image and the actors while writing, then supervising the shooting and editing. But with this film, he says, first of all, I haven't filmed the footage, so I had no control over this. Second, I'm dealing with a city and a landscape that I don't know. In one scene, there's a group of people in a cafe who are talking about the World Cup, and they address a friend who is filming by his name, Youssef. From this, Dibb adopted the name Youssef for one of his protagonists and set the story during the World Cup 2010, hence the title. Dibb worked with a sound engineer, sound designer, and 2 actors to create the dialogue and sound effects in similar spaces to those shown in the footage. For example, the sound for the car was recorded in a car. Although we never see the couple, the construction of cinematic space through sound and off-screen voices enables us to place the characters in the scenes and creates a convincing illusion that they really went on this road trip to Ramallah. Dibb was influenced by one of Jean-Luc Godard's films on the Israel-Palestine conflict, Notre Musique, in which he meditates on the shot reverse shot. This classical Hollywood technique constructs conversation scenes from disparate shots of actors talking and looking off screen. For Godard, it illustrates the dialectical relationship between image, documentary, and text, film, which he compares to the Palestinian Nakba and the Jewish Exodus as 2 sides of the same story. This laid the basis for Dibb's thinking about foreground and background dynamics. He says, when we talk about Palestine, we tend to talk more about Israel, about what Israel is doing. So Palestine is on the 3rd layer of the image, not the front layer. In Mondial 2010, he attempts to place Palestinians in the foreground and Palestine in the foreground and Israel in the background. The only time we see Israelis is at a demonstration in which the soldiers recede into the back of the image. In other scenes, Israeli settlements materialize in the backdrop. Mondial 2010 further manipulates fields of foreground and background in its story of gay characters, identities that, if not exactly absent in Middle Eastern cinema, have tended to be marginalized and stereotyped. It stages an impossible journey in this sense too, as characters that are not allowed to speak their love in public are given a voice and brought into the foreground. The story is told as if it were a video diary by Ibrahim, filming through the windshield from the passenger seat next to his boyfriend Youssef, who is driving. Their conversation on the road was built on small details relating to everyday difficulties faced by gay couples in the Arab world, through which, Dib says, you get to understand much more about their situation. As you heard, they're afraid of reserving a hotel room with one bed. Youssef suggests booking one with two beds to avoid any trouble. Later, they joke about a love bite that Ibrahim has given Youssef that might betray their relationship to others. When Youssef's friends discuss football at the cafe, Ibrahim teases his lover that he should reveal that they are gay and that they hate football. One of their motivations for leaving Beirut for Ramallah being that they could not stand World Cup festivities. Their relationship is hidden, even from friends, because of the lack of legal protections for LGBTQ communities in the region. But ingeniously splicing together foreground and background, the film constructs the space of a gay road movie. It makes possible that impossible journey in the sense that cinema can take us to places which we cannot physically go and can create an entirely new imaginary space that has never existed in reality. Dib regards this imaginary space as a tool for politics, like the dialectic that Godard discussed in Notre Musique. While Mondial 2010 is fictional, written in the popular genre of the road movie, it is also a documentary composed of commissioned footage that documents real places. The story builds towards a rooftop scene in which a Palestinian friend shows Israeli settlement building in the surrounding area. "Look how close it is to us. It's almost here," he says. Through him, the characters and we as viewers witness a city that's disappearing. Ibrahim is unsettled by the experience since it doesn't fit the image of Palestine that he had. It burdens him with the responsibility of witnessing. Dib explains that he wanted the focus of this queer road movie to shift from the body of protagonists to what they are seeing. We do not see the gay couple. Instead, we see what they are seeing, diverting the gaze onto the politically contested territory through which they are traveling. Although it would have been possible to insert images of the protagonists, not being able to see them was a political decision for Dib, part of, he says, an intersectionality of causes. He says, I'm not interested in doing a story about the drama of two lovers, about what happened in their relationship. I'm interested in using their story to tackle a wider society. In her essay, Film and the Visible, Teresa de Lauretis argues that films that merely represent gays and lesbians without altering conventional forms of seeing remain trapped within a heterosexual frame of visibility. By contrast, Mondial 2010, to borrow Lauretis's words, creates a space for questioning not only what they see, but also what we see in the film. The film's double taboo of a gay love story and filming in Palestinian territory makes screening in Lebanon risky, although it has been shown in festival openings, which are exempt from screening permits because attendance is by invitation only. And it's been shown online in Lebanon by the Beirut-based platform Aflamuna. In addition, it screened internationally, including at the Berlin Film Festival, where it won the Teddy Award for the best LGBT related film. So to conclude, as adopted in the films in this chapter or paper, the road movie, with its tropes of freedom and movement, vividly dramatizes the injustices of discrepant mobility in the region. Furthermore, discrepant mobility is not just a thematic concern, it underlies the conditions in which these films are made and distributed. Limits imposed on travel affect access to filmmaking locations and screening venues, as well as the ease with which cast and crew can move to and from these spaces, depending on their citizenship status and geopolitical situation. At the same time, the road movie has provided filmmakers with the creative impulse to overcome limitations on free speech and movement, a resourcefulness displayed in each of the case study films. As a private public space, the vehicle allows filmmakers to engage with controversial subjects, pushing the boundaries of what is permissible to portray. Although it is usually enclosed, the outside world is glimpsed through its windscreens and side windows as it travels through politically contested landscapes, bringing those geopolitics into the story in a dynamic relationship between foreground and background.
Great.
Okay, thank you very much.
Cheers, thank you. So I'd now like to invite anyone who's got any questions, any thoughts, anything that you'd like to put to Shohini, to add to her talk and so on. Please feel free, just indicate to us by, oh sorry, I better just stop the recording there as well, so just 1 second.